Hello, and welcome to another episode of the NK Active podcast. My name is Nick Knight, Direct and Podiatrist here at NK Active. So, something slightly different this month. We are going to be chatting around plantar fasciitis. And normally, as you may well know, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, that I will have different guests on the podcast. However, I really wanted to try and understand what do people think about plantar fasciitis? Now, as a podiatrist, my view may be biased because I see lots of it in clinic on a regular basis and because I've got that health training background. But I was really interested to know, what does everyone think about plantar fasciitis? So we put out on social media some simple questions about what plantar fasciitis is, how does it make people feel, and we got some really, really good responses. So the first part of this podcast, I really want to go through about answering those questions that come up in the questions that we asked. And then the second half is something that is always, it's a little bit unscripted because I have just got over a bout of heel pain myself. You may have seen on social media that a couple of weeks ago, I was suffering with some heel pain that come on out of the blue. Now it has finally settled, and I'm going to chat about my journey, not as a podiatrist, but as someone who has had heel pain as well. So the first question we asked was, what do people want to know about plantar fasciitis? And we had loads of responses, and I'm just going to pick as a summarize because there's lots of very similar responses. And the most popular thing people want to know is what causes plantar fasciitis. And if truth be told, we still don't know. We are still trying to identify what causes it. And the reason I don't think we're still trying to find out, and we will never know exactly, is because it's not just ever one thing that causes it. It's normally that perfect storm, everything coming together at once, which then results in the plantar fascia being irritated. We know from the research that there are certain characteristics and certain things that may put you at increased risk. So, for example, having a high arch foot is actually a risk factor for having plantar fasciitis. Obesity is as well, sudden changes in activity, and obviously having it before are all risk factors of having plantar fasciitis. However, I think we need to look at the bigger picture as a whole. So in clinic, when we're speaking to people, there is normally a change in activity levels that normally then result in someone coming into clinic with plantar fasciitis. And when we then go back and we're speaking to them about the history and the journey they've been on, there may be something that at the time they thought wasn't that relevant regards to change in their activity. However, they may have found, actually, do you know what? Instead of playing golf once a week, I decided to go walking 5 miles in one go twice a week. So they haven't actually increased what they're doing. But then if you think about a round of golf, you'll take about 4 hours maybe, and it'll be start, stop, start, stop. Whereas if you go for a sort of a 5 mile walk, which is the same length the average golfer will walk on a golf course, but you do it in continuous non-stopping, then you haven't got those respites in between. So that could be classed as a change in activity. So the other thing that can result in this overloading is something known as hypermobility. And this can be, I hear it called as double jointedness or increased flexibility. And in a nutshell, having that increased flexibility may ask some of the soft tissues, muscles, and tendons to work slightly harder, which means that it leaves them prone to getting overloaded. Now, if we now start thinking about, okay, how can we prevent it coming back? That was the next big question. And linking to that is, can I get rid of it for good? Now, again, looking at the research, there are no papers looking at what can prevent plantar fasciitis because it's such a big topic. And the issues when you're doing a research paper is you can only really look at a certain number of things. However, when we're talking about plantar fasciitis, we got to talk about plantar fasciitis. However, we always need to take the person attached to that plantar fasciitis into consideration as well. So we're sort of thinking about how do we prevent it coming back, or how to reduce the risk of it coming back. A lot of that is around education. So it is about finding, why did this happen in the first place? It's almost like you want to put your inspector hat on and sort of go to that crime scene and find out, okay, why did this happen in the first place? And what do we need to change? How do we need to change it to now reduce the risk of it coming back? So it may be something as simple as, well, a change in footwear. It may be having a better understanding around different activity levels that may aggravate the plantar fascia for you. Or it may be a case of, okay, we need to keep up with strengthening exercises and keep strength and exercise to a certain level to reduce the risk of it coming back. Because yes, you can get rid of it for good. Yes, if you've had it once, yes, you are at a slightly higher risk of it coming back again. However, in my opinion, there's no reason as to why this should keep coming back. If your plantar fasciitis keep coming back, then that tends to mean you haven't got to the bottom of the reason of why it happened in the first place. It's almost like if you put a nail in your hand, you take a paracetamol, the pain will go away. As soon as the paracetamol wears off, the pain comes back because you haven't removed the nail, in this instance, the object that is causing the pain. So actually, with something like plantar fasciitis, it is finding out what that root cause of it is for you and then trying to resolve that element. I think if you can achieve that, yes, there's no reason why you can't get rid of it for good. You may find if you have had an image and it has shown some thickening of the plantar fascia, just because it is thickened doesn't mean you've signed yourself up to a life sentence of plantar fasciitis. Far be it. It doesn't. Sometimes I think when we're looking at imaging, we can forget there's a person attached to that scan. Just because something is thickened, yes, it may be aggravated, but there's always something you can do about it. There is always the ability to help to get this pain to settle. The next question that we asked was, if you've ever had plantar fasciitis, how did or how does it make you feel? Because again, I really only took an understanding of this over the last few weeks when I had my heel pain and how it made me feel and how it may say, well, actually, I may not be able to play hockey at the weekend. And I thought, well, actually, that feels pretty rubbish, if I'm honest. Everyone that knows me, that I if I'm not doing sport and exercise on a regular basis, I can get a little grouchy, get a little grumpy, and I don't like it. And it sort of felt like there was a part of me being taken away that I may not be able to do hockey at a weekend. And everyone knows how that feels when you got something you love doing and you'd be told potentially, I can't do this. So people were saying that it made them feel older, it made them feel more vulnerable. And people started questioning themselves. They started doubting that, am I ever going to get back to running again? And they were frightened for the future. And there was this fear that actually, if I keep active and mobile, I'm just going to make it worse. So I need to sit there and do nothing. And when we think about it, it's all quite fearful language and fearful thoughts. And that's not going to help your plantar fasciitis. But it is really, really important and really, really enlightening for me as a podiatrist to really get under the skin of how does it make people feel? Because as soon as we can help understand that, we can help sort of combat those fears. We can help build the perfect treatment plan for you, because there is no reason to be fearful for the future. Yes, of course, you can get back to running again. It may make you feel older for now, but actually, once you're fitter and stronger, you're going to feel even younger. But I completely get it. When you're in the middle of it and you got the pain here, you can just go into override and just thinking, there is just no way out of this. I can't see a future. And it is taking that into consideration when you're having treatment with the plantar fasciitis, and whoever you're seeing to help manage your plantar fasciitis, it is really, really important that that is taken into consideration so they can help manage and educate you. Hence why I said earlier on, education is a very, very big part of how I believe we should be managing plantar fasciitis. Next question was, if you have ever had plantar fasciitis, how did it or does it affect your daily life? Some people will say, I didn't affect me. I know it hurt, but I just kept on going. I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it affect my daily routine. Other people are, I just stopped doing all exercise and sat down and just rested until the pain settled. Other people are speaking about the financial cost of seeing multiple different professionals, getting multiple different bits of advice and just getting confused about the whole situation and not understanding what can they do, what can't they do. Other people were starting to say it was starting to affect their ability to do their work, to do their job. And we start thinking we can't have a point where heel pain is preventing someone from completing their livelihood, because that could have a net impact on their income. And then when you then start speaking about the financial costs and implications of seeing multiple professionals, it is getting down to trying to find that person or that clinic or that team that can help really get to know you, to understand your fears, your barriers, and getting down to the cause of the problem to help build the right plan for you. Because we see it in clinic where people have been to many different practitioners over the past, had come in with reams of different sets of orthoses or paperwork and just come in like, I'm just confused. I don't know where to go. And I completely get that. That would be very, very confusing. But stuff like that just needs to stop. And we do need to get to a point where we have a more consensus way of managing this. And it is talking about getting to know the person, trying to be consistent with the approach. And as I've mentioned already, getting down to the root cause of that problem. The answer I liked the most out of this was walking through it. And then we're not always saying that walking through pain is always going to be a good thing. But we're also not saying that pain is always bad. Just because something hurts, just because your plantar fasciitis hurts, it doesn't always mean that you're making the problem worse. We know anecdotally, and we know from our clinical data in NK Active, is that the more active we can keep people through a soft tissue injury like plantar fasciitis, the better their treatment journey tends to be, because you can keep active, you can keep doing things. So my heel, when I aggravated my plantar fat pad, I done everything I can. I rested from any running and hockey during the week, and then managed to play half a game of hockey that Saturday. Managed half because that's all the heel would let me do before it become pain above that 4 or 5 out of 10 scale. But by doing that, I felt much happier in myself. And do you know what? I didn't get the negative repercussions the Monday morning, Sunday morning after. So I got up and said, actually, no, it doesn't feel any worse than normal. So I'm like, my body coped. I managed to just play through a bit of hockey, which I think mentally put me in a much better place for living and coping with that heel pain. The other question that we next asked was, is there any information that you're not sure about, fact or fiction? So this was the idea of trying to bust some myths around plantar fasciitis, because you only need to look at Facebook, you only need to look at Google and the internet and social media to find there is lots of myths out there. So one of the one was things I think I said does rolling a frozen bottle of water or using a spiky ball underneath the foot, so rolling under the foot, does that help? Yes, that can help. That is actually, I personally think, really good to do in the evening after being on your feet all day. Sit down in front of the TV, grab your frozen bottle of water or spiky ball and just roll the plantar fascia. And you'll tend to find it will just make life feel more comfortable. It's most probably not going to speed up the recovery process, but it can be something that can just help reduce your pain and symptoms, which is also very, very, very beneficial. Another question I asked was, what about the use of therapeutic ultrasounds? Now, this may be a bit of a controversial one, but unfortunately, there is no evidence out there to support the use of therapeutic ultrasound. Now we know it doesn't, in general, doesn't do any harm. So if you have had it and you have found it helpful, fabulous. But it's not a first line treatment. It's not something that tends to be recommended for the management of plantar fasciitis, because as a whole, we tend to know that using ultrasound doesn't really do much for your musculoskeletal conditions, so your tendon strains, your muscle strains, your plantar fascia problems as such. So we tend to not do it because we know as a whole, the majority of people won't find a benefit. The next one was actually an interesting one. Was speaking about footwear, and it was speaking about of someone had been told that if you've got shoes that bend upwards at the toe, so apologies if you are listening to this and not watching the video on YouTube, we'll post a link to the video in the comments. So I'm currently holding up my Saucony Endorphin Pro 3, and you can see it has that rocker nature in the front. And someone had been told that wearing shoes with that rocker nature in the front where the toes bend upwards is going to make your problem worse because you're bending the toes up. So, are the toes bent up? Possibly in the shoe. However, it doesn't mean that they're going to continue to bend, because if you take something like the Endorphin Pro 3, it actually has a carbon lining. So as you go to push off, the shoe doesn't bend that much. You just rock and push yourself forward. So your toes aren't going to bend up. You're not going to aggravate your plantar fascia wearing a shoe like that, because you're not going to get as much bending in the toes and the muscles around the foot, because a lot of that is going to be taken up by the shoe. And they were then recommended that they have to wear barefoot shoes. And I haven't got anything against barefoot shoes. We just know in general that going to that minimalist bare type shoe in someone with plantar fasciitis as a whole doesn't tend to help someone recover from plantar fasciitis. I'm not saying that you can't wear barefoot shoes if you've had plantar fasciitis. Yes, you can do. We've got many people that choose to. What we're saying is if you want to try and offload the plantar fascia, thinking about the footwear, going to something for slightly stiffer, supportive with that rocker nature in the front of the foot, it's most likely going to be more helpful than a barefoot shoe. Another one was actually interested about actually how can we cure it? And that really answers it back from earlier on, is saying it's about finding the root cause. And then they then link the next part of their question is, can they cure it with taping? Now, there are different types of tape out there. You've got your kinesio tape. Everyone sees it during every major sporting event, athletes with brightly colored tape holding themselves together. Or you've then got your sort of your rigid zinc oxide tape. Now, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of using kinesio tape for plantar fasciitis. In my hands, it just doesn't tend to work. What does tend to work is actually using that rigid zinc oxide tape. And again, we'll chat about it slightly later, but that was one of the things that actually really helped me get back to activity. So taping can be helpful. Think of taping as your get out of jail free card. It is not, and I stress not, a long-term solution. It is a tool that can help offload the plantar fascia in the short term to get you through an activity that you want to do. So the aim is, in my head, is that you should not be taping more than 6 weeks down the line on a regular basis. Now, if you recover from plantar fasciitis and you've got an ultra marathon coming up and you just want to tape one off for the ultra marathon, that's fine. But what we don't want to get is the mindset of people relying on taping their foot on a regular basis for many reasons. One actually being skin health. If you are taping with zinc oxide tape on a regular basis for months on end and only changing the tape every sort of 3-4 days, what you'll tend to find is the integrity around the skin health. It may start to itch. You may start finding bits of skin flaking off, and you just run the risk of causing not damage to the skin, but some irritation. It would become could become itchy, and then the last thing you want is when you pull the tape off, a bit of skin comes with it, because that's not pleasant at all. Final question was, if you've overcome plantar fasciitis, what was the biggest thing that helped you? And there were a few things here that have come up that I'm going to put my neck on the line and sort of say that it's still not quite managed. Because if that's what you, and I'll touch on that now then, is that one of them said, avoid running on tarmac. But if your goal is to be able to get out and do some running on tarmac and to overcome it, you've had to stop that happening, stop doing that. Then I would argue you haven't got over it just yet, because you're not back to doing the level of activity that you want to do. There is no reason why you can't get back to running on that tarmac on a regular basis. Now, you may be perfectly happy that, say, I'm going to do all my running off road and I'm not going to run the tarmac, and I am perfectly happy with that. But what we don't want people to do is sort of adjusting their goals. Say, okay, I was a road runner before. I would love to go back to road running, but I can't now because every time I do that, the foot flares up. I think you then need to revisit your story. I think you need to go back to, okay, what has been missed? What has been the oversight? What can we do now to try and help get you back to activity? Because if you've got plantar fasciitis, there's no reason why you can't get back to running your road marathons. It's just, again, doing that detective work, finding out the cause of it, finding out, okay, what's the right treatment process for you. Other people said insoles and time. Yep, we know that there's evidence out there that suggests that using foot orthoses or insoles can be very helpful in the management of plantar fasciitis. And on the topic of insoles and foot orthoses, I'm going to let you into a little secret. They're not a life sentence. It doesn't, once you've been given them, it doesn't mean you can never take them out ever, ever, ever again. A lot of the time, you may find that insoles may only be you only need them for part of the journey whilst you're getting back to activity and you're improving that strength capacity, and you may be able to find you can remove them. Or you may find you only need your insole if you're doing a distance over a certain length or spending so many hours on your feet. Think of them as a tool to help allow you to do the activity you want to do and to offload the plantar fascia. But I don't want people to go into thinking, right, I've got insoles, that's it. Insoles for life, same set of shoes for life, never going to change, because that's just not true. And I know I harp on about this, but it is something that I still see on a regular basis. And if you sort of think of it as a tool to offload and to help facilitate you getting back to activity, you can sort of almost change your thought process and mindset around what the role of an insole or foot orthosis has to play in the management of plantar fasciitis. But yet, for some people, can be really, really helpful. And there is some research suggesting that maybe getting something made bespoke before you may be better than something modified off the shelf. Another person said exercises. Yep, I completely agree with that. What is interesting about exercise is when you actually look at the evidence, there's not much out there to support it. But on the other hand, there's not much evidence. No one's actually really spent the time looking at what I call a proper rehabilitation process with regards to plantar fasciitis. So our internal audit data at NK Active does suggest that if you get the right exercise and rehabilitation process, then this is very, very helpful in the management of plantar fasciitis. And then our data shows that 6, 12, and 18 months, people then are getting a return of symptoms. So yeah, I do think that is really helpful. And actually stretching the plantar fascia can be something that can be very beneficial. And then the other thing someone said was collagen. It's an interesting one. It's a lot of these supplements get a lot of attention, and it's something that, as a podiatrist, that's my training. I'm not a nutritional expert or a dietitian, and collagen is everywhere. But to my knowledge, there isn't much evidence out there suggesting that taking a collagen supplement in isolation is going to help improve your plantar fasciitis. So hopefully found it interesting. Hopefully you decided, and it was really interesting for me to get an insight of what people who I've never met before. This was just something you put in some Facebook groups and social media and just let random people who I've never met, never spoken to, just give me their thoughts and feelings. So I just want to thank you to everyone that contributed to that. So let's quickly have a discussion about my journey of heel pain. So roughly 2 weeks ago, I think I stood on one of my children's doll, bit of Lego or something that the parents out there listening or watching, it's like you mostly stand on so many toys, you forget in which day you stand on what thing. I swear they go to bed and they sit there with their little, like, in their bedroom reading a book and sort of pen and paper and plotting, right, where can I trip mum and dad up? Because yeah, happens all the time. So I think it was that. And naturally, I do have a high arch foot, so I am prone to overloading the plantar fascia region. However, I don't think I have plantar fasciitis. I think I irritated the plantar fat pad, which is a soft squidgy bit underneath your heel. The reason being, typical plantar fasciitis type symptoms, you'll start to notice as you'll be stiff and painful in the morning, and then on walking, it'll tend to be worse as you push forward. Mine didn't really have the morning stiffness. It just hurt all the time from getting up. And it wasn't when my foot went to push forward it hurt. It was more of the heel hitting the ground that aggravated the plantar fascia. And then when I squeezed the heel, I really, really didn't like it. So all that would point towards a fat pad irritation. And that's most probably aggravated by my natural shape of my foot. And then most probably the icing on the cake was standing on a child's toy. And what do we do to try and manage it? Well, firstly, I lived at work in my Endorphin Pro 3s, and I kept my foot taped with zinc oxide, changing the tape every 2 days for a week. And I made myself up at home a little gel heel cup, and then actually made myself a sort of Blue Peter DIY insole as well to go in the shoes. Because when you're thinking of offloading the fat pad, you just need to offer a bit of compression and cushion it and just give it a bit of time. And using something like the Endorphin Pro 3, where it has that nice soft nature due to the Pebax foam, and then it's nice and light as well, and then it has that rocker, and meant that I could do all my activities and feel much more comfortable. And again, the taping was something that was really, really massive and helpful for me, because as soon as I taped my foot, the foot just felt compressed. It felt supported, and that just made life a lot easier. I then switched any running and hockey, and I just switched it all to the Peloton because I could cycle as much as I like, and I didn't get any symptoms. So that gave me my bit of my exercise fix, as it were. And then I did Friday night. I was toying, don't I play hockey? Do I play hockey? What do I tell my patients? And the thing is that when I'm on a hockey pitch on a Saturday, I'm not a podiatrist. I'm just any old hockey player. And sometimes, not say I ignore my own advice, but sometimes I think, actually, should I have done that or not? I'm only human at the end of the day. And I decided to play. I sat the first half out, or the majority of the first half, played the last 5 minutes, and then I thought, actually, no, things are feeling okay. So then I managed to play 30 minutes of the second half, and then 5 minutes ago, I was like, no, this heel's starting to feel really sore, above a 5 out of 10. And for me, that was it. It's like, I decided to myself, as long as my pain is a 4 out of 10 or below, then I'm going to continue, because I know with that, I'm not aggravating, I'm not making matters any worse. And as I then woke up Sunday morning, and the heel, it aches, but it didn't ache any more than it had on the Friday and Thursday morning. I managed to spend a day with the family. Again, limited my activity, but still made sure I went out with the kids, went for a family walk. And then actually got back on the Peloton. And then it was about Thursday, Friday, sort of day 10, 11, that actually I woke up and I thought, do you know, my foot didn't hurt yesterday. And I didn't realize, you just completely forget, because you so get used to just it being part of your daily life, even for a short period of time, that you turn around and think, actually, no, that is feeling a lot better. And then I thought, right, didn't do any hockey training that week, still decided to lift weights in the gym. Tried to then still continue the peloton, and then played hockey last Saturday and completely pain-free, and it hasn't come back since. So now, tomorrow, I'll start getting back into my running routine, knowing that overall things have settled down. So yeah, I've managed to help get my plantar heel pain to settle down and get back to sport, but I still managed to maintain my activity throughout that period. I didn't rest completely because sometimes rest can be detrimental. In my opinion, a lot of the times when we're talking about musculoskeletal injuries, one of the only times that will completely rest someone is A, if something's gone ruptured, fully ruptured, or B, if there's a bone stress injury or a stress fracture involve them. But your normal, so your plantar fasciitis, your tendinopathies, your muscle strains, you can normally maintain a good level of activity to keep you going, to keep some fitness up in between, which then, in my opinion, does really help speed up that road to recovery. So, really hope you enjoyed this episode. It's been a little different from normal. So, please do give us some feedback, whether you like more of this or you want to go back to the old style of interviewing, having chats with people. Please do subscribe to the podcast. Have a great day, and I shall see you in the next episode. See you later. Bye.